here on a bus. So I've been moving all day. Fortunately, I was able to get my clothes changed and be here soon at this point. My name is Larry Harding. I happen to be the executive director of an organization called the Working Waterfront Coalition. And I also happen to be a member of an organization, some of the representatives that you see up here, known as We All Ride the Bus. Woo! Or some of us ride the bus when we can find a bus that will take us where we want to get to. We're here today to talk about some of the concerns that we have. Does this work?
Yeah. That one works.
We're here to talk about some of the concerns that we have and the reason that we have these concerns. Not because of an isolated situation, and I want to make that real clear. It's not just something that happened recently. What we are seeing and what we are concerned about is an ongoing situation that we believe is contributing to the deterioration of our transportation infrastructure in Portland, primarily the bus service. I'm not going to spout facts and figures to you today, but there's a lot of information available to you. To my left are three other of my colleagues that will be able to provide you unique perspectives on the transportation situation and the problems that we see. The problems specifically deal with the transit-dependent people throughout the Portland metropolitan area who are being excluded from the discussions on how we need to fund and pay for transportation. Many of the businesses that we work for and places where we like to go, those businesses pay payroll taxes, as you know. That supports TriMet, and yet the bottom line is that we are really becoming desperately isolated in communities throughout the Pacific, or the Portland metropolitan area. We have some specific issues with regard to the Linton community, where you cannot get to a grocery store on Saturdays and Sundays if we implement the plan that's on the table right now. I've visited with folks in the Friends of Baltimore Woods area, also have some problems. So I want to start with that introduction. My background, again, is with the Working Waterfront Coalition, and that's a group of businesses who employ up to 20,000 people in the harbor area. That's a lot of jobs. And if you count the subsequent jobs that are related to that, that's an additional 20,000. So we're talking about the payroll taxes on $40,000 worth of jobs, and we're simply trying to get our employees to and from work. Seem to be having a difficult situation, and in fact, many of the bus stops along those routes, 16 and 17, are slated for elimination, reduction in services, and yet the fares are going to go up. So we have a unique opportunity to pay more for less, or in some cases, more for nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over right now to a couple of my colleagues and let them specifically give you some examples of what they're facing as they try to interact with their communities. And I'll first introduce Pamela A., who's actually the president of the Northwest Industrial Neighborhood Association, and I've had occasion to deal with her on a variety of opportunities, mostly putting people to work, and Pam does a good job of that. Pamela?
Thank you very much. As Larry said, I am president of the Northwest Industrial Neighborhood Association, and that is the neighborhood that's from the Fremont Bridge to the St. John's Bridge, from the river to the mountain, or St. Helens Road. And there's a lot of major employers and smaller employers in that area. I am also president of a small staffing firm called Accounting Connections. So I have the unique opportunity to have conversations with both employers and people that are looking for jobs. And the service in that area has been reduced over the years, and now they want to reduce it even more. And one of the examples that just happened to me 2 weeks ago is a candidate that I've been working with has been out of work since November of 2010, and she rides public transportation. She called me about a job that I had listed for an accounts receivable for a transportation company in Northwest Portland. She was not even able to get to the interview. Even though it would take her to get there would be 39 minutes of walking time. And she lives on Halsey, Northeast Halsey. 39 minutes of walking time. And the closest the bus comes to, and this is on St. Helens Road, is 0.8 miles away. So it would be very difficult for her to get to work. This is an office job. To get to work and be presentable when she arrives at work. And it's just very difficult for myself to be able to place people in the Northwest Industrial area when they're on public transportation. It's just very, very limited. Reducing the services and increasing the fares are going to exacerbate this issue for these people, whether they have jobs and are looking for new jobs, or whether they haven't had jobs for some time and they're looking for a job. So that's my information.
Let people know what you do as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Casey Chama. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Intercultural Organizing, which we are our house here today, and welcome everybody. We are really, for us, in terms of the population that we work with, well, let me say this first of all. We know that the community of color, immigrant and refugees, low-income families, the transportation system, particularly the bus system, it's not as simple just riding a bus. It is a lifeline for them. Whether trying to find a job and getting around the city, or whether simply taking care of their daily basic necessity, it's actually a lifeline for them. We also know that in our state, in the city of Portland, we know that there's a demographic shift that's taking place. We know that we're becoming more and more diverse. So a lot of the immigrant and refugee community, so let me give you a quick example. Immigrant and refugee community, when they come to this state, particularly refugee population, the first thing that the community introduces them is that how to ride a bus. Simple as that. The first week when they arrive, that's how they learn around the city. That's how they go to the ESL programs. That's how they get to the, trying to find a job. And if they get a job, that's how they get through the job. So really, for me, what I emphasize and what I want to underline is that this is a critical issue in our region, and we need to think about it very, very carefully how we address. Let me give you a quick example. 25% of the people who ride the bus are people of color. 53% of the tribal riders who earn less than $30,000 a year are transit dependent. 35% of the people of color do not own cars, vice versa compared to the 20% of the white population. So we have an issue, we have a disparity, we have an equity issue in this sense. So we need to be thinking about that. The second piece that I want to emphasize is that it actually makes economic sense at this time when we are in the midst of our lifetime economic challenge. When we have more and more people who are actually moved out and pushed out of our inner cities because of the housing market, because of the cost of living. Many of the immigrant refugees and people of color and low-income community are actually being pushed out of the city to the suburbs and the outside of the city. So, although they are, and so they have to commute back and forth. So that means they are really depending on the public transportation, particularly the bus system, to go around. The second piece, the last piece I want to emphasize is that if you even look economically, when you have a large population who are seeking jobs, every time that we invest in public transportation infrastructure, it actually creates an opportunity. And it actually, investment return, some folks estimated 1 to 4 per dollar. If we invest $1 for transportation, we might actually get $4 back. So it actually, even common sense, it makes sense to invest our public transportation and particularly the bus system. So that's kind of really, even if you look at the dollar and cents, that actually makes sense. So hiking the fares and eliminating the services, it's actually counterintuitive and counterproductive. So what we would like to suggest is that we need to be, as a community, as a Portlanders, as Oregonians, we need to think about our public transportation infrastructure very seriously. It really has to. We can't really, when we have an economic crisis, taking a knife and slicing the public transportation and saying that's the only thing, one of the few options that's available to us. No, that is not one of the few options for us. One option that is available for us is actually invest our infrastructure so the people can get to their jobs. When they're seeking jobs, they can get their job, finding jobs. So it helps the community to create an opportunity, economic growth in our region, in our state, and in our city. So for me, even if you look at it really makes sense that at this point when we're having a challenges, that we have to think about the future. We have to think about where are we putting our money and where are we investing. So my emphasis is this, is that as a community, we need to come together. This is not about issues of because we have a budget crisis. This is about investing our future. So really, as a community, we have to invest this infrastructure, and particularly we have to invest on the bus system. Because I want to underline again, the community that we work with, the larger population that in our region, they are going to be depending on these services. So that's my takeaway point, that's what I emphasize, and I want to conclude, is that we know that the gas prices are not going to come down. We know that, right? So it's actually even making sense that you have to actually help folks to get out of the driving the cars and ending. So you have a more, if you have a more transportation that's dependable, that's reliable, then you're actually helping the community to actually have better opportunity in terms of jobs, schools, and so forth and so on. So for me, I want to emphasize that, and I want to really encourage the tribe and our community to actually think about investing this infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and the bus system particularly. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Ben Duncan. I'm the board chair of Opal Environmental Justice Oregon. I'll tell you, it's hard to follow up after Casey. But my work and background is in public health, and so when I look at transportation, I approach it through that lens. And I think, as Casey eloquently said, there are a lot of significant racial and socioeconomic health disparities that result from investments or lack of investments in public transportation, specifically when we talk about fare increases and service cuts. And those folks that are most impacted by transportation decisions are those same communities, those low income and communities of color. Whether it be the rising cost of fares or diminished service or missed transfers and connections or these kind of negative public health externalities like air toxics. So there's many benefits to public health by having a bus system that meets the needs of all its riders, and everyone benefits from a fully funded and accessible transportation system, even those folks who never use it. Public transit reduces air toxics and greenhouse gas emissions, which of course is necessary for reaching Portland's goals of decreasing our carbon emissions by 80% of 1990 levels by 2050. There's an extensive body of epidemiological evidence that links air pollution to mortality and hospitalizations due to asthma and chronic lung disease, heart attacks. So reductions in pollution have both major impacts on individuals' health, but it also saves money in our healthcare system. But those are the obvious health implications. So less obvious is the impact on physical activity. So folks that ride the bus are able to meet their daily physical activity standards. Or mental health impacts associated with missed connections and longer wait times. Keeping cars off the roads reduces accidents and fatalities. And finally, there's a public health cost when TriMet raises fares, and in this case, a 20% increase for single two-zone fares, and over 15% for a two-zone monthly pass. When we talk about those increases, it's coming out of the pocket. That's money that could be spent on things that could benefit health, like healthy food, like recreational activities. So our communities that rely on transit, who are most impacted by fare increases and service cuts, these are the same communities within public health that we see experiencing negative impacts from all kinds of health inequities. These things pile up on these very same communities over and over again. And if we believe in and value communities where we are all healthy, where all of us have access and equal opportunity to health, it's absolutely critical that we support increased investments in public transportation. And we do everything we can to avoid fare hikes and service cuts, particularly on those who are most dependent on the system. Now I'll close because we all benefit from public transportation. It's absolutely vital that we do this because it's beneficial to all of us. Thanks.
A couple of last quick messages here for you. My colleagues have all hit on some very critical points. It doesn't take any rocket scientist to figure out that we've gone through some very difficult economic times of recent. And we're celebrating because unemployment's down to 8.3% in Portland. That's not a new low, folks. Some of us in this room are old enough to remember when it was 4% or less, okay? Here's the bottom line. Quality of life begins with an opportunity to work. You can't improve your life if you can't take care of yourself, all right? Pamela has said that she's tried to place people in jobs. We have some cultural equity issues where the folks who are less able to afford living in certain parts of downtown Portland are being pushed out to the outer edges of our community. That's where they can afford to live. How do they get from there to work? If it's going to cost them 20% more to ride the bus, if it's going to cost them more money with less frequency to take bus routes that are being reduced, or they can't get there in time in the morning, as we have a situation in the industrial area, you cannot get on a bus early enough to get to work in the area along Gunderson, Front Avenue, Sulzer Pump, Georgia Pacific. What do? We're being told we should ride the bus less, or drive our car less for health reasons, for community health reasons, but we can't get somewhere. It's a critical situation. It shows a lack of planning. It demonstrates a lack of engagement with the community. And that's what we're here today. We'd like to keep our jobs. We'd like to keep our employees working. We can't afford to get them to the bus to work on time the way the bus system is going. Two-thirds of all of the buses, two-thirds of all of the trips provided by TriMet are in the bus. And yet it's time to look at the budget, and we're ending up cutting the most significant aspect of our inventory, product, service that we have to provide. We're suggesting to TriMet that they take a different approach. First of all, maybe foremost, the public ought to be a little bit more engaged in this. We ought to be able to look transparently at documents to figure out how in the world TriMet decided that it's okay to walk an extra half a mile to your place of employment. What helped bring them to that decision? They need to interact more with the community, and frankly, they need to have members of the community helping them make these decisions. I would remind TriMet management that at the last board meeting, Dr. Bethel himself, a member of the TriMet board of directors, turned to staff and said, the folks in the community that I represent are tired of being told this is what you get. They want to be there at the front end of the decision, not at the back end of the decision, and I think that's appropriate. We should get to help make the decision ourselves. We believe it's reasonable to charge premium fare for premium service.
Right.
There are places in you get premium service and you have the luxury of 3 or 4 different types of public transportation, you should be willing and able to pay for that. If that's where you can afford to live, then you should be able to afford to pay a little bit more money than the folks who live out in Southeast Portland, in Lentz, where I come from, and some of the other communities. And we also believe that as far as investments that TriMet is making, and I'm not talking about projects that we're right in the middle of, but it seems as if we ought to, if you're a business owner, and again, I come from a business perspective, if I'm, let's grant some assumptions. Let's say that there is a budget deficit. I'm not sure because no one shared the figures with me, but I just read the newspaper, some of the same things that you hear. Well, let's assume there is a budget deficit. Could someone please explain to me why we're making phenomenal capital expenditures in future projects that won't come to fruition until long after I'm passed away? It doesn't seem reasonable to continue to make the kinds of investments that are being made now without taking a look at paying for what we already have. We've spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on that infrastructure. Before we let it fall apart and go away, we need to make sure that it runs properly. That means we need to make sure that our bus system is running properly and that we're providing service to the people who depend upon the bus to get to their jobs, get to the grocery stores, get to the doctor appointments, the places that they need to go. Let's don't take that opportunity away from them. That just continues to erode their quality of life, and that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. So, I don't have anything else to offer comment-wise, but if someone has a question of these folks up here, I'm sure they're happy and ready to answer.
I have a question. So I'm Ingrid McDown, I work for the Urban League of Portland, and I was just wondering, I did some work with Opal in 2010 around surveys and TriMet stops around the city, and I just wonder, has TriMet ever done an impact statement about how the communities are impacted by the decisions they make?
I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody here from TriMet that can answer that either, for that matter. Is there? John, I know you're working for TriMet.
He has all the answers.
Well, yeah. No, go ahead.
There you are.
Thanks, Ingrid. Great question. One of the things that we are asking for local vis-a-vis TriMet is to do better data collection. It's something that I think if you went and talked to their Director of Transit Equity and Diversity, Janelle Bell, who's a great guy, I think what you're going to find is that he agrees that they lack the data necessary to really even know how folks are impacted. What they do know is they know the demographics around where their amenities are, but they don't really have a good understanding of how folks use their service and how folks are specifically impacted based upon the proposals that they're putting forward. So no, and we need to push them on that.
If they have, we don't know about it other than our own studies. Yes, sir.
So I'm hearing a lot of requests, and you've chosen your speakers wisely for a personal staffing appeal, an economic appeal, and a public health appeal. If I'm to boil this all down and take one thing away from it and tell my friends, what is it? You know, we just got into data. Can you boil that down for me a little bit more?
The message?
Yes.
Do not divest yourselves of the bus system that we've spent so much time building up over the years. And continue to maintain the bus system and the bus routes. Quit making us pay more for less.
Not instead of anything, it's about basic core priorities, that we all benefit from the bus system, and that's where we need to get back to our basics, and we need to invest in our bus system before we overextend ourselves.
So instead of divesting, invest.
That's right.
Invest.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. There's some, I don't know, do we have documents available? We just gave you a few talking points, some issues. There are some other things that I want to make sure that you go away with, because this is not just, oh, well, here's an idea. In fact, we believe that there are some other things that could be done. We know that TriMet pays the city of Portland $6 million a year to underwrite the operating loss for the streetcar. Okay, I'm not opposed to the streetcar. I'm not opposed to people using the streetcar. But if the city owns a streetcar and is running at a $6 million operating loss, perhaps the city ought to address that. Perhaps there ought to be other ways that TriMet shouldn't have to divest, if you will, fund outer perimeter transportation routes less so that we can put more money into the core service in downtown. There's also some suggestions that we've come up with regard to operating efficiency. And again, I don't want to inundate you with details and data, but the fact of the matter is that in comparison to other systems like the size of Portland and even smaller and larger, there are systems where you can have automated ticketing systems. There are better jump lanes, if you will, where buses enter and exit in high traffic areas and so on. All of these things are great. We haven't been doing that. We've been investing money elsewhere to the neglect of our bus routes and our bus system. So there are lots of other things that TriMet could do, and we'd like to see them do. We'd like to have them have a conversation with us. Yes, sir.
It seems like, I think everybody would agree that the large employers that Pamela mentioned in the Northwest that don't have a way to get folks to these high-paying jobs, that's terrible. But if you were looking at this from a system-wide perspective, it seems like we also have to compare, given the limited resources, maybe those are not the most important stops. Maybe those are not the most highly trafficked stops. So how should we as like citizens of the city be weighing that against a stop on the 72 and saying, like, which is more important? If it's ridership, do you know how many riders there are at these stops on the 16 that are being lost?
TriMet has not been able to give us accurate numbers. What I committed to is helping them to geocode, which is one of a technique that they use for figuring out where people are coming from and where they're going to. Well, in the 21st century, I would have thought they would have known that already, but I guess not. Which kind of begs the question, if you don't know, then how can you justify cutting a route? Nevertheless, there are some things that we'd be happy to help work with them to build ridership. And I had a good meeting 2 weeks ago with some of their marketing folks, and we talked about developing ridership, and there are programs. The only thing that I get confused by, let me just put it this way, the only thing that I get confused by is if we say maybe a trip out to the industrial area, and remember, now I'm talking about 20,000 jobs in the harbor, 20,000. The average income for one of those jobs in the working harbor is $46,000. That's more than the average income for the average individual in the city of Portland. So if in fact TriMet's funded through payroll taxes, and you've got jobs that are pulling down $46,000 a year a piece to the tune of 20,000, and that's not even the ancillary jobs that service those, where are your priorities? If providing service to the people who pay you is not a priority, then what is the priority?
So are you arguing that ridership shouldn't be the metric? That because this is making possible this very valuable business, that we should be looking at the value of the business rather than the value of the stop to the riders who are riding today instead of the riders who got to that stop for their first 6 months on the job?
Actually, what I'm arguing is that if TriMet's got some secret formula that they're using for evaluating exactly where we go and where we don't go, then perhaps they ought to sit down at the table with those of us who actually are footing the bill.
Larry, thank you. Can I have a question on that?
Case.
I think the question is that any time that we started betting against is this option, who's going to get service, I think my response to answer your question, I think, is that we have to do enough investment that it shouldn't be either this is solved or that is solved. Which one do we cut? Really, the answer is that what we are asking TriMet and what as a community, what we want is that a well-funded, well-infrastructure built bus system that helps our economic opportunities, that uplifts people from poverty. Those are the things that we will look for. It shouldn't be which bus line should be cut. It should be all bus lines should be provided, and we can do that if we do the right, smart decisions that as a state, as a city, as a region that we need to do it.
Some of you have an interest in attending the TriMet board meeting. Now you've got some questions you can ask them too. But that starts at 5:30, so that's about 12 minutes away. So I'm going to wrap up here.
I think
I'm
there
not
was
leaving.
one more
There was,
question.
Did I hear?
I just wanted to say that it's
Yes,
really
sir.
simple. The buses go where the max doesn't. The max does not go where the buses go. So which would you rather have? It's really limited on the rail. The buses are free-wheeling more.
I'd rather have the bus. I
Yeah,
don't
it
know.
goes everywhere.
So we're gonna take some folks over to the public hearing just down the road. If you want to join us, we'd love to have you. And if anybody has any follow-up questions that are more specific, feel free to come find me, and I'd be happy to provide you some additional information. Thanks a lot.